The safe to use indoor generator from Milwaukee. Is it something you need? Let's find out. Okay, this may not exactly be an indoor generator, but it is a power station which acts as a generator, and it is safe to use indoors. You should never run a gas-powered, diesel-powered, propane-powered generator indoors, ever. It's a bad thing to do. Well, the reason I'm talking about generators is because we have a hurricane, Hurricane Ian, that is staring down our throats right here in Central Florida. Yeah, it looks like the latest cone or approach path is going to come right across our county, something we're somewhat used to living here in the belly of Florida. But anyway, it's still not a fun time, but a great time to talk about being prepared sometimes for storms, hurricanes, or just not having power. Now, Milwaukee sent us out the 2845, which is the M18 Carry-On Power Station. Now, power is up to 1,800 watts continuous and 3,600 watts of instantaneous, or inrush, if you will, or just a few second range. In fact, we'll actually test that to see if it will actually power something for a few seconds in that startup range, and then be able to continuously supply that 1,800 watts. We got some great tests for that. And we also fire up a tool that we haven't done in, I don't know, at least a few years. You can tell by all the dust on it. Anyway, let's get started on this, and you may wonder, why in the world do we have two hard hats sitting here? Well, it's because I'm going to have to wear two hats, but you'll have to wait till the end to actually see that. Anyway, let's get started. This is Milwaukee's brand new M18 Carry-On. It's powered by four 18-volt M18 batteries. It's a 3,600 watt surge and 1,800 watt continuous power station. You must have four of the 18-volt batteries to power this, but they don't all have to be the same size. It's recommended that they're larger than a 5.0 for best output scenario, but they don't have to be. The model number on this is the 2845, I think -20 if you're getting it as a bare tool. And we'll just take a look around this. So we have a power button here. It won't power up until we actually put the batteries in. And then we have a battery gauge here that kind of gives us an overall understanding of the charge status on all of the batteries. And then we have a 120 volt plug-in here for input that's going to not only, or obviously, charge the batteries on here and provide power. Also, we get 220 volt outlets here up to a 15 amp output. And then we have a USB Type A right here and a USB Type C right here. I believe it's a 2.1 amps output on the Type A and 3 amp output on the Type C. Now, the Type C is only output. It is not going to charge with the USB Type C, so you can't plug in the Type C and it charge the batteries. That's only going to happen through the 120 volt power. Now, when you buy the 2845, basically you get it as you see it here, and then the 6-foot power cable that you can plug in to charge the batteries. You get almost a roll cage effect here on the handles here that you can see, and a couple of different things going on the handles up here, and we'll show in just a moment. But really, whichever way you stack this, it's kind of protected, even with the batteries in there. So you see what I'm talking about, where we've kind of got an exoskeleton that's acting as a roll cage, as well as the feet, wherever you set this. Now, on the bottom side, it does have rubber feet, doesn't have any of those on the sides. But you can also sit this in any way that you want, because there's no gasoline or oil in it, so it's not going to affect anything in that scenario. Now, we do have a couple of hooks here, because you can opt to buy, I think this is 25 bucks to buy the strap, and it is a nice heavy duty strap that's going to clip in here and hook to either side, so that you can carry this a little easier, because it's not exactly a light unit. We'll actually weigh it here in just a few moments, but you can opt to get that additional shoulder strap as well, but it doesn't come with that. You see two batteries on this side, and then two batteries on this side, and the other hook here on the other side. Nothing Nothing on the back other than the label that tells us model number and any of our warnings and things like that. And then on the bottom, pretty solid on the bottom, other than maybe a few air holes or something like that. Now here on the sides, we do have air holes that are going to be utilized for the fans to keep everything cool during charging and discharging in this. That's another good time to talk about discharging or using this as a power station. You cannot plug it in and charge the batteries while you are also discharging. In other words, we can't plug in power tools and be using it while at the same time charging the batteries. Now, there's a lot of questions on that, on why that is the case, and there's really a couple of main reasons. Number one is cost. To add that technology does cost money that you'd be paying for. It is capable to do that, but you're talking about adding money. You're also talking about adding real estate in, just places to put all those electronics, as well as weight on that, and also the actual heat it would create in not only the hardware and software to do that, but also when you do that to your battery system. In other words, when you're pushing in from the battery while you're taking out, I've read it where it's almost like you're giving a double whammy to the battery, where you're basically kind of taking two lives out of the battery, like when lithium ion batteries, when you charge them, they're supposed to last like 1,000 cycles. To where they're still 80% after 1,000 charging cycles, where if you're doing that charging and discharging at the same time, you're really attacking those cells almost double, so you're almost creating half the life of that battery when you're doing that. I don't understand the science completely behind that, but that's kind of an argument I have heard from that. So that makes a little sense to me. But anyway, just wanted to explain why. I'm sure that Milwaukee has that capability to do it if they wanted to, but it would be a more expensive tool, a heavier tool, as well as it would be worse on the batteries as well. Now the size of this, you're looking at height-wise just under 14 inches, like 13 3/4 inches. Width on it across the front right at 15 inches. So 13 3/4 tall, 15 wide, and then depth or width this way, whatever you want to call that, a little over 12 inches. Looks like 12 1/8 inches. So roughly 12 by 14 by 15. Now weight on this as a bare tool, if you will, looks like right at a little under 28 pounds, 27 pounds, 6 ounces. Let's see if that gets, so 27 pounds, 6 ounces. And obviously that's going to change depending on which batteries you're running. So I'm going to throw two 12 amp hours on here and two 5 amp hours on here. We'll actually put them in a moment. So you're looking at really about 38 pounds once you have two 5 amp hours and two 12 amp hours. Now, if you had four 12 amp hours on there, obviously that's going to get heavier, but you get that. Or whatever you're adding for batteries is going to add to that. So it's still say a 40-pound tool if you have 4 batteries on there that you're carrying with it. Now I'm going to take two 12s and put them over here. And then I'm going to take two 5s and put them over here. And the cool thing about this is, so now we've got two 5 amp hour, two 12 amp hour batteries. And let's say you've got it on the job site or you've got it in your truck or what have you. Obviously, if they want to take the whole tool, they could. But to keep somebody from just walking by and grabbing a battery for their favorite power tool, you can actually turn the lock handle there, and now you can spread this out. And now you can put a lock hasp or a master lock through there, a combination lock, whatever you want to put through there, and lock that into place where you can't get these batteries out now. Or we'll simulate a lock there. So the 5 amp hours will come out somewhat, but you'd have to really pry to get those out. And then the 12 amp hours, it's really right on the battery. You can't really get those out at all. And I get it, that's probably not the most secure lock in the world, but let's face it, most of those thefts are when people can quickly grab something. So the fact that we're slowing them down, I like it that it's a quick and easy lock if you want to. If you don't care about it, You can lock that out of the way, and now it just sits like that. But it is a cool idea to quickly be able to lock that if you want. So now that we have 4 batteries in there, we're going to hold the power, turn the power button on, and you see we have 4 green indicators here. We also have 3 out of 4 charge indicators. So it's telling us that we're almost full, but we're not completely full. And again, it's taking a gauge of all these batteries to tell us where that status is on how much charge we have. Now the cool thing is when we plug in our power, so we've got this plug here that it comes with, nice thick gauge as well. Plug that in. Now when we look here on top, you see we have an indicator that tells us the charge status of all these batteries. So we get a green solid light. That's telling us that they're all fully charged, which is interesting because when I pull this plug, I have to power up again, and it's telling us that we're only 3 out of 4. Well, I know why that's the case, because one of these 12 amp hours, oh, that's interesting. So when I pull a battery off, it requires there be 4 batteries to actually power this. So I just showed you when you pull one off, it actually gives you an alarm that says, hey, by the way, something's going on. Now I can't power any tools because I don't have a 4th battery, and it actually shuts the power station down. Now I can put this back in, and it gives me the indicator I've got 4 batteries. It does not power back on. I have to hit my power button again to turn that back on. But that's fine because I'm already there at the tool anyway, so it's not a problem for me to hit that power button. And now it's actually recognizing we've got a full charge on all those batteries. Now the cool thing about this charger is this is acting as a very high power sophisticated charger because it will charge all the batteries simultaneously at 3 amps. So 3 amps here, 3 amps here, 3 amps here, and 3 amps here. So it's acting as a supercharger, if you will, and doing all these batteries at once, not just charging one, then the next, and the next, and the next. So it's a very good battery charger. It's not a slow battery charger that's going to charge all those, but as I mentioned, you cannot be pulling from at the same time you're putting in. Now the lights here on top that we just showed you, the green lights, the solid green lights telling us that we're completely charged. A flashing green light would tell you that we're almost completely charged, kind of topping it off. And then the flashing red light's going to tell us that that's under, it's actually, you know, low on charge and it's in its charging state. And then I think you'd have a solid red light if you're actually overheated. Typical on all Milwaukee chargers. Something else, the power output on this is pure sine wave technology. It's not modified sine wave, it's pure sine wave, meaning any of your sensitive electronics, your laptops, your tablets, your phones, things like that, are going to be absolutely fine by charging either off the USB or off the 120 volts. So just understand that you do get that pure sine wave technology. Okay, let me slide this over a little bit and bring in one of our favorite little accessories here, especially when testing generators. And what we have here are 20 500 watt halogen lights. So these are like your old shop lights before we had LEDs everywhere, and you had a lot of these halogen bulbs that were powering a lot of your shop lights and external lights that you plug in, and you probably may even have a few of those still today. But these things draw a lot of power. In fact, they draw about 500 watts a piece. Maybe not exact, but it still gives you a good understanding or representation of what it takes to power these. So you're talking about on one switch, we're powering 2 of these. So that's 1,000 watts for every flip of the switch that we give. So what we're going to do, we're going to plug this in here, and we're going to see if we can call on a couple of these switches and power these lights. And then we'll probably take a few bulbs out so that we can only be powering 500 at a time, and see if we can get a startup at, say, 3,500 before it triggers off. Because like we said, we can do 3,600 for a startup. In other words, when you got a refrigerator that starts up, you got an end rush power or a startup current of say, you know, 2,200 watts or something like that, and then it may settle down to be a couple of 100 watts. So let's use these lights and see what we find. So we've got it plugged in, we have it powered on. I'm gonna hit my switch here. So that should be roughly 1,000 watts. And we're gonna call on 2,000 and see what happens here. I don't think the plastic on the power station was liking that too much. It was smoking a little bit there. Tells you how much energy, how much power is going through there when they're heating up that bad. So it's constantly running these 2,000 watts here of power, or near about anyway, maybe 1,800 or so, but that's what the continuous power is on this, is 1,800 watts, and obviously it's handling that fine. Now, I'm going to go ahead and call on a third, which should be 3,000, which it should power this for a few seconds and then maybe trip out. Okay, it's been running about 30 seconds. You heard the fan kick on the power station, but it's still powering right at 3,000 watts of lights. There, now it just tripped off. So we got the alarm, everything finally shut down, but that was probably close to a minute. You'll see it on the screen. We'll have a timer on there. But I know we were counting past 30 seconds before it did that. So we were beyond that 1,800 continuous and still running those lights for quite some time. I'm pretty impressed by that. I've seen the other power stations only last a few seconds on that initial surge and then trips out, you know, within a few seconds there. But we were running that for quite some time before it actually kicked that off. So let me kill these switches, turn that back on, and we'll hear the fans run and probably cool this down. While that's running, I'm just going to kick on a couple of these again, and we'll let it sit there and run. So now we're at roughly, you know, 1,800, 2,000 watts. We measured this the last time we did this, and this varied between 1,800 and 1,950 watts on two of these banks running like this. So I'm not going to guarantee it's 2,000, but I know it is beyond 1,800. Okay, that's been running several minutes and it hasn't affected anything. It hasn't tripped out at all. So pulling at its max doesn't phase it a bit. That fan does continue to run. So I'm sure that's going to affect your efficiency of the power that you're pulling out of those batteries. In fact, let's discuss that for a moment. Looks like the edge of our handle there is 180 degrees, or 200 degrees from those halogen lights. At 227 degrees from the halogen lights. Yeah, that's pretty warm. Not recommended, by the way. Okay, now let's talk about output and about how these batteries work on this power station. Now, you have to think of this as just power in and power out. In other words, these batteries don't have some magic happening. As I mentioned before, Jesus is not in there making electrical pixie dust out of thin air. It's just not happening. So whatever power is in your batteries on the power station is going to be output to whether you're charging something, whether you're running a tool or something. But there is a limited resource in that battery while it's charged, and as it depletes, it's going to go away. So here's my point. So that 12 amp hour battery at 18 volts has 216 watt hours. Okay, so 12 amp hours times 18 volts gives us 216 watt hours. Now, how do we get to that? Well, because we know that amps times volts equals watts. Now, that's an equation there. So that's always something good to know. And you can divide and figure out, amps off of watts and everything else. Because, if your plug-in power is 120 volts and you know how many watts you got, then you can take your 1200 watts divided by 120 volts and know, okay, that's a 10 amp tool or whatever that may be. So you can work these equations any which way you want to, but when you know that, when you know that amps times volts equals watts, then you can figure out a lot of these things, and that's what we're going to do here. So one 12 amp hour battery has 216 watt hours. So we know I've got two 12 amp hour batteries. Well, I also have a 5 amp hour battery at 18 volts. So say it with me, 5 times 18 is 90 watt hours. And I've got two of those. Okay? So I've got 216, 216, 90, 90. So that's 180 and 432. So 432 plus 180 gives us 612. Let's check my math. 6 plus 6 is 12. We carry the 1, so that's 1, 2, 3. And 3 plus 18 is 21. Carry the 2, 2, 4, 6. 612 watt hours. So that's how much battery, or that's how much power we've got in this power station to deplete, and then you have to take a little bit of that away to run the fan and to run the little lights on it and things like that. So it's not going to be 100% efficient, but that's what we have to work with in total, which means that if we had something that took 600 watts, it would arguably run that tool for 1 hour. That's as simple as it comes. And we'd have 12 little watts left over to run all those little other doodads that are going on in that machine. No, but that's the idea of what's going on here, is you basically have one big power supply here with batteries in it that's powering the other batteries that you're charging or the tools that you're running. So the 1800 and 3600 numbers that we see advertised on the tool, that's power output. So that's power to power the tool, which is different than the capacity of the tool, which is basically determined by the capacity of the battery. So this is basically your fuel tank, which is 612 watt hours. But as we saw with the lights, we can definitely power 1800 watts continuously, and that's from the power side of the equation. So in other words, this is your fuel mileage and this is your horsepower or your torque. Now let's wipe this away with a little brake clean and just talk about a few different things. They say like a microwave is like about 1,000 watts. I know a fridge, I looked the other day and found some numbers online and it was grossly off, because I think it was talking about maybe old refrigerators, and it was saying like 700 running watts and 2,200 startup. And I think that's old stuff, because I actually measured our fridge the other day, and at running, I never saw it get, even at startup, I never saw it get over 220 watts. And I've got the biggest residential fridge that Samsung makes. And like I said, I never saw it get over 220, and I watched to see when it would kick on. And most of the time it was running somewhere around 110 watts. And then sometimes that would go all the way down to 0. You would open the door and it would go to like 20 to run the lights and things like that. So that gives you an idea of a fridge. So at 612 watt hours, somewhere between, you're going to get somewhere between 3 and 6 hours run time on that. And of course, that's not determining when that goes to 0 and how often that's cycling off. So you're going to get more runtime out of something like a fridge if you're using this in an emergency situation. Now, if you're using a 15 amp circ saw, say a worm drive saw, then obviously 15 amps at 120 volts. Well, that's your full 1800 watts. Okay, not watt hours. That'd be 1800 watts, and then obviously, so we could power that saw for less than 30, so for about a 20-minute runtime, because we had 612. So 600 is about a third of 1800. 600 goes into 18 3 different times. So that gives you an idea of how much power we have in this tool. So it's not going to have a problem running anything that kind of plugs into that. It's not going to run a 20 amp tool, but it will run a 15 amp tool, and then it will obviously give you some run time on all this before you have to plug it in and use it again. But just wanted you to have an idea that it's power in, power out. So this is our really old rigid rear handle worm drive saw. Model number is the R3210 7 1/4 inch worm drive rear handle circ saw. This is a true 15 amp saw. So plug this in. And as you can see, we didn't even clean the dust off of it. I think that's like an old Irwin blade, if I'm not mistaken. So we'll see how this is going to do. Go ahead and bury the blade. Well, it works. Look at that, didn't even clean the rust off. Still powered through. Can you believe that it powered that old 15 amp rigid circ saw? That thing, I'm telling you, it's been in the weeds for I don't know how long. You saw the old rusty blade. I'm telling you, we didn't touch it. I literally took my thumb and wiped the dust off of the model number so we could read it. Didn't touch the blade or anything, as you can see, and ran that through that wood. And it had a tough time, I'll be honest, because that blade, I think, was bad before all the dust and rust. Here in Central Florida, we're used to thunderstorms quite frequently during the springtime, summertime, and even into the fall. And then hurricane season runs from June through October, and then even sometimes outside of that window. So it's not uncommon for us to have several hurricanes that come up through the Gulf or through the Atlantic and sweep past or near Florida. So it's not uncommon for us to have dead hits. It definitely happens every couple of years. So again, it's not something that we're not used to preparing for, but at the same time, it's not a fun thing to do. But talking about generators, talking about power stations, again, in our region is something pretty common because it's not just when the big storm comes that our power goes out. Many times thunderstorms do that. And let's face it, when you're looking at a job site, let's say you're in a new development, working from a temporary power pole, and when lights go out across a whole city or across a whole county, that temporary power pole is probably one of the last things they're worried about. They're probably more worried about those consumers that actually have households to take care of. And so a lot of times you're doing without power on those job sites, or you're fighting over that temporary power pole. Anyway, so to have a power station or a generator is a great thing to have. The fact that now you have a power station with the Milwaukee batteries that you use in your own power tools is a great idea as well. Now, pricing on this, you're looking at $699 for the bare tool. So if you get the 2845, you get it with no batteries, that's going to be $699. Not a small pill to swallow. But again, when you're looking at generators, you know the cost of that as well. And when you're looking at something that will power, 1,800 watts, 3,600 watts, again, you kind of understand the math there of what it takes as far as money. When you look at something that you can run indoors, it's quiet, you don't have to listen to it run. The only thing you hear is the fan from time to time, and that's probably 60 decibels at best. That's if you're close to it. Now, if you're looking at batteries, as we mentioned, you can run this thing on 4. You don't have to have 12-volt batteries, but these are going to run $250 a piece for a 12-volt battery. So if you had 4 of these, add $1,000 onto that price tag. So you're looking at, our alarm goes off. Anyway, so add 4 of those, you're looking at $1,000 plus the $699. So you're looking at $1,700 all in to have 4 12-volt batteries and the power station. So again, it's not a product for everyone, but you know best as to when and how much you need a power station like this. And it's a great idea, again, if you're already on the Milwaukee platform, that you get that. Now, here's where I have to wear 2 hats. I'm going to put on my Shop Tool Reviews hat and maybe even my personal hat and talk about my thoughts on maybe what could have been added to this. I would love to see an LED screen or an LCD screen so that you could actually see a readout of input and output watts, seeing what, are you plugging something in and charging it, and more importantly, the output watts. So how quickly are we draining our batteries? A real-time readout. We see a lot on the RV or, outdoor type power stations. We see those. That's quite common. So it's not uncommon to have that. So the fact that we don't have that, kind of bothers me a little bit. I would also like to see maybe even a one key connection to it, to where at least from my phone I could see, okay, what kind of output and what the status is and things like that. So I'd love to see that. I would also like to see that two-way power generation. In other words, be able to not only charge the batteries, but also output at the same time. I get it. It's more weight, it's more money, it's what have you, but the option to do that would just be great to have. Also, another big one would be to see a solar input. So again, if we're fighting over a temporary power pole, we're on a job site, we're, at a new construction, and we're fighting over that temporary power pole, and, to be able to either run a tool or to charge our batteries, I would love to be able to have a solar input. You can buy these solar panels pretty cheap now, and most commonly they use those Anderson connections or just a round style 12-volt plug-in. The ability to charge this with a solar panel would be great. So that's my shop tool reviews. That's my personal hat I put on. Now, I get it on a Milwaukee stance on this, and this is not an official Milwaukee stance, but this is just one thing that I understand from years of working with Milwaukee, and there's a message that they give across. Doesn't matter what trade you're talking about, doesn't matter what tool you're talking about, and that is they are 100% professional oriented. They want their tools in the professional's hands, and they're not going to meddle in the DIY sector or in that RV sector, in that outdoor sector. So I get it when they're like, look, we're looking for something to be an answer on a job site. If it ends up on a campsite, so be it. If it ends up in a boat or in an RV or powering someone home in an emergency, so be it. But that's not what our focus is. Our focus is on the professional trades. I get it. I absolutely get it. I do. And really that message is pretty synonymous across the board. They've done that well. However, my cynical side again says, but you do know that those same tradespeople are using these on the weekend. So I would like to see some growth in maybe, listen, this is version 1 of this. Maybe we'll see that in another version. Maybe even the ability to daisy chain these, things like that. But I would love to see some type of solar input to actually charge these batteries. And by the way, I love the simultaneous charging when you plug in the power cord on that. So listen, check it out for yourselves. Let me know what you think in the comments. As far as power output, this thing does a great job as far as, like I said, horsepower, torque. This thing is laying down the power very well off of 4 batteries. But it's just the, obviously the runtime that you're going to be limited to by the largest battery being this 12 amp hour, 216 watt hour output of a battery. Oh, hush. Sorry about that. Anyway, so let me know your thoughts on this. Again, it's the Milwaukee 2845 M18 Carry-On Power Station. Hey, stay safe in those storms if you're somewhere in the affected area. We're definitely going to buckle down here. But keep track of us on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and even TikTok. And if you don't mind, would you hit that like and subscribe button if you haven't done so already? And by all means, if you hated our video, then give us a thumbs down. But would you let us know in the comments why? Have a great day and keep smiling.